Hey ladies and gentlemen of the internet, Adrian here. I recently made a trip back home to Japan. I say recent, it was a couple months ago, but nonetheless, I've been uploading content from that trip. And I often get asked from that trip what was my favorite pickups, what were some of the favorite things I brought back. And I got all sorts of great stuff from retro video games to this coffee mug from Starbucks that's on my desk right now. But by far, my favorite pickup from that trip, my grail pickup in the world of collecting, was this Omega Speedmaster watch that I have on my wrist right now. And I wanted to set aside some time today to talk more about this pickup, why it's been a grail watch to me, the kind of journey to get to this watch, and the decision that ultimately let me pull the trigger on this watch. So let's go back to how I got into watches in general. I think that's important to start. I got into watches really early on, over a decade ago when I was in high school. My dad was always into watches and luxury items and things, and it's something that I admit at an early age I just did not have an appreciation for. I was a skater kid in high school. That was the extent of my fashion sense and so on and so forth. But I remember even like trying on some of his jewelry in the beginning, like vividly falling on a skateboard when I was wearing one of his. It was a Fendi like fashion watch, but using my arm to like break my fall and just scraping on the hill concrete on the face of the watch. And this Fendi fashion watch had like a reversible face, kind of like a Reverso does. So thankfully the glass was flipped and I just like scraped all the back of that watch face, but I was terrified that I was gonna get in trouble. But I digress. That's a story for another day. Needless to say, I didn't appreciate the things that I had and I was being lent and borrowed back in the day. But I did kind of get the overall like idea of it, right? Like how it could add on, one, like from a fashion sense, like how it adds onto an outfit and can be this kind of accessory. Two, obviously at a very basic level, the pure function and utility behind it. You use it to tell time, and nowadays I understand and agree like this can do all of that and then some. It was just like a nice idea of having this physical piece of craftsmanship on the wrist. And I remember when I got to try on his like nicer end pieces, like his Rolexes and so on, doing that thing that most people do when they get a nice watch, where they really kind of just like bounce the wrist to feel the weight and that sense of like quality behind it. And in wearing that watch to one of, I think it was like one of my first formal events where I had to go like suit and tie, and just being really enamored by it because of the iconic history behind it, this idea of the symbol of success that the brand like Rolex represented, and just like realizing that there's this whole other world behind that world of watches, right? I remember my dad had brands like Breitling and Bulova and Movado, like a wide spectrum of like the watch world, right? And learning more and more about it just got me more and more enamored with wanting to start my own collection and get my own pieces. And I remember just going through the motion of, as you do when you have some money at an early age, because I was working, and getting into the world of collecting. You make a lot of mistakes, like anybody does, but you develop that taste over time. But one thing that was constant as I got into these different brands outside of the world of Rolexes, and you saw brands like Audemars and Patek and Richard Mille and all this stuff, Omega was a brand that constantly popped up, and rightfully so, right? It had a lot of rich history with things like the Speedmaster and the Speedmaster Pro, rooted in race car driving and whatnot, and then becoming the moon watch through NASA. I remember seeing it in 007, one of my favorite like movie series.
Former SAS types with easy smiles and expensive watches. Rolex.
Omega.
Beautiful.
And it was a brand ever since then I had such a high admiration for. It was always on my list, but like I said, early on in my collection, I went through all these other brands and types of watches and just never pulled the trigger on an Omega. A couple years ago, right before the pandemic, I did try to bid on a Seamaster. That was it was like the collaboration they did with the James Bond movies, the Spectre movies, and recently with No Time to Die, they even had one where they had like Omega James Bond themed watches. Bid on one of those on eBay and just lost barely at the last second there. And it was a sign for me like that I just wasn't ready yet for the brand. But you fast forward to this recent trip to Japan, where I knew two things. One, I was bringing a watch with me that I was going to be giving to my dad. It was a Rolex Datejust, simple kind of white gold, watch that I wanted, white gold, and just simple silver, tones to it, that I wanted to give him because he'd been wanting. And I was going to be replacing that because I knew I wanted to also get a watch when I was visiting Japan and visiting home. So early on in the trip, we spent a couple days in Tokyo, but I ended up not really having time to look for a watch there because a lot of that trip was dedicated to showing my partner around who's never been to Japan, and my sister who was also meeting us out there. It wasn't until we got to Okinawa, Japan, back home for me, where I got to really slow down, take my time to really start going on the hunt for the Speedmaster. I had a couple of criteria in terms of what I wanted out of the Speedmaster. Ideally wanted like a 38 millimeter version. I wanted the panda dial and face originally, so that's where like the subdials are in white and in black face. So it has that panda look to it, like the popular, for example, like Rolex's Daytona, for example. But other than that, I wasn't really particular whether it was used or brand new. I started a lot of my collection in the secondhand consignment market to, get a lot of those pieces early on at a more affordable price point. So that's where I started. I looked at a lot of the secondhand shops I used to shop at, some of the new shops that my parents took me to that they check out and frequent. Cool. And a couple of the stores had some. There were two contenders that I really, really liked. One was in much better condition than like the second one that I saw, and thus the price for the better condition one was a little bit higher. But for the most part, it just wasn't quite enough for me to pull the trigger. Then there was another store where I saw one, and it was also decently priced because you also have to factor in the yen rate at the time where the US dollar was so much stronger, tax-free shopping, all that good stuff. So you were getting a pretty sizable discount on a already, really nice watch. And the next time I went back to the store a couple days later, it was gone. It was sold out. So that was a bummer. And they had some online in stock that you could buy, but given the the language barrier and stuff like that, I didn't want to risk buying something online through it. So just was a sign that wasn't quite right yet for me to buy it from, in that moment, I should say. Ended up going to a mall in Okinawa, Japan one day just to go check it out, one of the bigger malls in Okinawa. And while they don't have any secondhand consignment stores, they do have luxury stores in there. And one of the chains that they have is called Happiness. They sell watches, clothing, bags, with the whole nine. And their Omega section was pretty built out. They had DeVille's, they had Seamasters and Speedmasters, and they had quite a bit of Speedmasters. They had the Speedmaster Pros, like the very iconic quintessential version of it. They had multiple Speedmaster editions, so they had the white face. They had a navy dial, which I hadn't seen in person. They had this all black dial, and they had the panda dial. So they quite literally had all the editions that, not all of the editions, but all the editions I want to kind of see in person, and I got to really, for the first time, try on, because I'm one of those people, when it comes to things like this, I don't want to try it on until I know I'm going to pull the trigger. Otherwise, I'm afraid, when I try it on and really love it, I'm just going to bust out the card and make an impulsive purchase. But I looked at them all, took pictures of them, and then decided to walk away first because we were going to grab lunch and walk around the mall for a bit more to really kind of sit on this decision. I sent the picture off to some friends in the States, waited for them to reply to see their opinions. And even though I was originally dead set on the panda dial, I remember talking to my partner, the black dial was something I was also really drawn to and a lot of people liked as well because it's just iconic and classic and sleek. And I ended up going back to the store and pulling the trigger on this 38 millimeter Speedmaster with the black dial. And have not regretted that decision ever since. It took some time to process the purchase. Obviously, they had to adjust the length of the band and take out some links to adjust it to my size. They kind of gave me a quick tutorial on how to use the basic tools to set the time and so on and so forth, adjust the date and all that good stuff. And then, they packaged it all up. I have my box sitting right here next to me. I ended up shipping this back to the States because there was no way I was able to physically pack this in my luggage because I had so much other stuff. I ended up just wearing the watch back to San Francisco, and I shipped this in a box with other stuff that I was shipping home anyway. But ultimately, all in all, I was really happy to finally pick this up. I ended up spending right around $4,000, give or take, which was a pretty good price point given the amount of discount I got from the sale had its own store going on the store had its own sale going on that week. I got tax-free shopping because had a U.S. passport and I was visiting, and the yen rate in comparison to the U.S. dollar. The U.S. dollar is so much stronger, so I quite literally saved hundreds of dollars on this purchase, all in all, if not nearly 1,000. So, yeah, it was definitely kind of like a perfect amalgamation. Now, that being said, I did get it from a store that had it brand new, so I paid a higher just like sticker price on it overall compared to the used market, but still very happy with the purchase, all in all. And I will say, like, look, this is a watch that has so much history behind it. Obviously, from a utility standpoint, it has so much craftsmanship behind, like the caliber 321 movements and the SI14 spring balance, all the nitty gritty stuff you can get into, the tachometer bezel and all this cool stuff. I'll be honest, like, even as somebody who's a watch enthusiast, I don't use all that stuff. Some of the stuff looks cool. I don't know how it fully works. And I know the watch world can be a little daunting because it can be very, at times, snobby and in closed door culture. But like, it's just something like, I think you can appreciate things for what they are. And this is just one of those things that I appreciate it for the amalgamation of what this watch is in the world of watches. And to say I finally have one is just something that I'm very, very proud of, and something that has definitely become an essential in my rotation of watches. And something I wear on a daily basis. I dress up, I dress down. And it's a watch that I would say, like, while this isn't a full-on review of it, and maybe in the future I can hopefully get a full in-depth review of this watch out, I will say for aspiring collectors or people who are looking to potentially add a Speedmaster to their, growing collection, first-time watch, what have you, I think this is a really, really great essential piece to have in the sense that it's one in the more, and I say this in quotations, affordable range of luxury watches. And what I mean by that is that obviously you can get nice watches for $100 or less than. And this is still obviously in the thousands of dollars. But what I mean by that is in contrast to a lot of the higher end brands out there, some of the Rolexes, some of the Pateks, APs, all that good stuff. Obviously, Omega has its high-end range, don't get me wrong, but I think the Speedmaster has like such a wide range of like additions and types, from the Speedmaster Reduced to the Speedmaster Pro to the standard Speedmaster, that you can get one that is a very, I would argue, affordable price luxury watches to have. But more importantly than that, it's also one of the more obtainable luxury watches, in the sense that unlike Rolexes, where you have to oftentimes go through an AD and you have to have a purchasing history and you have to be lucky if they even have inventory, maybe you got to wait 6 months, you got to buy a couple other watches to show that you have what it takes to buy, the one that you want. Like, skip all of that. With an Omega Speedmaster, you can pretty much walk into most watch stores if they carry them, and they'll probably have one in stock, if not make it easily available for you to buy. And that's what's ultimately nice in the first place. So, while some people enjoy that hunt and whatnot, I think the Speedmaster is just such an iconic watch, such a GRAIL piece to have. And I remember literally the first day I flew back to San Francisco, probably wasn't the best decision, but I went out to a bar with some friends that night after flying all the way back from Japan to go out. I was wearing this, and I met somebody who does and sells like watches for private collectors and whatnot, and recognized this watch at the bar and shouted it out. And I think that's one of the cool things. Like in the watch world, it's one of those watches, like, if you know type thing. And it's one of those cool pieces of the watch history. So would definitely recommend this to people out there who may be looking to get into watches, or you maybe want just one of those, like, really quintessential piece that you can add to your collection, and maybe not have to buy more. I think this is a watch that serves that purpose. I look forward to really giving this the run through and exercising it through over time, adding some new straps to this. I want to get like a NATO strap, and so on and so forth, to really kind of just give it more character and options and customization. But I am nothing but excited and satisfied with the purchase that I made for this Omega Speedmaster. So, all pun intended, I thank you for your time in this kind of story time breakdown of one of my iconic pickups, my GRAIL pickups from that Japan trip, and one of my GRAIL pickups in general from the watch collection world. Hope that it gave you some insight, and with that, as always, I'll catch you in the next video.